Okay, so good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to this tutorial chapter number 7. In this tutorial, we're going to cover everything about MySQL. So we're going to look at the MySQL queries. We're going to look at what we call MySQLi versus PDU. We're also going to look at how we connect to a MySQL database, how we create a database, how we create tables, how we insert data into these tables, how we insert multiple data into tables, how we retrieve that data in order to display it, how to delete the data, and finally, how to update the data in the table. So those are some of the things that we're going to cover in this particular topic. Now, ladies and gentlemen, MySQL is one of the most popular database system that is used together with PHP. This is the logo of MySQL. Now, PHP has the ability to connect to a database and also to manipulate the database. So we're going to see how here. Now, what is MySQL really? The short answer is that MySQL is a database management system. Now, I just got this picture from the source. I've tried as much as possible to just put the source of each of the pictures, so it's not mine to give the credits. So it's a DBMS. So what can a DBMS do? So you can see in this picture, a DBMS, database management system, can be able to define a database. It can be able to add records, to query the records, to update, and also to manage data. So normally it is DBMS that will send commands to the storage area. That is where the data is being sent. For example, when you're using MySQL, we are using a relational database, meaning that these tables are interrelated. So that's what we call a relational, from relationship. It's a relationship database because one table is related to another one. And now the DBMS will now be the interface between the storage area and the application. So you have, for example, your web application here, then that is written in PHP, and now MySQL is the one that is going to be dealing now with the storage area, with the database. So that is what a database management is, and that is what MySQL is. So it's a database management system that is used on the web. It runs on the server just like PHP. It can manage small as well as large applications. Now, it is very fast, it is reliable, and it's quite easy to use for beginners. Now, MySQL actually uses the standard SQL. As you can see here, MySQL is simply named after the co-founder daughter. The co-founder is called Monty, and her name is My. So that's why it's My, then SQL. So it simply uses the syntax of SQL statements, which I'm sure you've learned in database 1 and in database 2. Now, MySQL compiles on a number of platforms. Just what that means is that it runs on several platforms. By platform, we mean Windows, we mean Linux, we mean which other operating system platform do we have? That one that runs on the Mac operating system, or whatever. Then MySQL, just like PHP, is open source, and it is developed, distributed, and supported by, guess who? Oracle Corporation. So it's a really amazing database management system. Now, in MySQL, data is stored in tables. What is a table? A table is a collection of related data. Normally, it consists of columns and rows. So this is an example of a table called company, which has the columns company underscore ID, name, description, primary underscore contact underscore attendee underscore ID. And this particular table is, for example, related to other tables like the attendee, for example, who is attending a conference in the company. And that also has some columns like attendee ID, first name, last name, phone, email, and whether the attendee is a VIP or just a normal visitor. Now, databases are very useful for storing information categorically. That's why from this kind of relationship, it's now referred to as a relational database, because each table is related to another table in one way or another. Now, a company, for example, may have a database with the following tables: employees, products, customers, orders, etc., etc. Okay. Now, PHP is used together with MySQL to build web applications that are cross-platform, meaning that once you develop it, you can host it and run it on any of these platforms: Android, Windows, Apple, even gaming consoles, BlackBerry, etc., etc. So that is what we mean by cross-platform. You can run it on any of those particular platforms. Now, we use queries in MySQL in order to perform some of the functionalities like creating a database, creating a table, adding data to it, retrieving data from it, or even deleting or editing data in the table. Now, a query is simply a question, or also referred to as a request. A question or a request. This is an example of a query. Select last name from employees. So here, these ones that are colored in blue, they're called SQL keywords. Then this, for example, is the column name that we want to retrieve, and this is the table name. So this is just a query to select all data from the table employees, specifically just the column last name. So that is what this query or request will achieve. Okay. Okay. Now, PHP 5 and later versions work with what we call the MySQLi extension, where I stands for improved, and it also works with what we call PDO, which stands for PHP data objects. PHP data objects. Now, earlier versions of PHP was using MySQL extension, just MySQL. But this was deprecated in 2012. Deprecated simply means it's no longer supported, it's no longer improved, and therefore that project has been abandoned, and people are advised to move to the more secure MySQLi or PDO connections. Now, for example, if we are using MySQL extension, it will still work, but only on earlier versions of PHP. But from PHP 5 and to the later versions, you can only use MySQLi or PDO. Okay, so let's see how you can use this. First, we look at the comparison between these two. Now, which one do you use between MySQLi and PDO? You can use whatever you like, but you should consider some of the things here that I've highlighted. For example, PDO has the ability to work with more than 12 different database management systems, while MySQLi can only work with MySQL database management system. So that's one of the main advantages of PDO over MySQLi. Now, what does this really mean? This means that if you want to change your application to use another database management system, it will be easier if you had written your MySQL statements using the PDI extension, because that means that you won't need to change your MySQL syntax. But if you wrote your application using MySQLi, it means that you'll have to rewrite the entire code if you want to change the database management system that you're using. So that is one of the things that you should understand. Now, both of them are object-oriented. However, while PDO is purely object-oriented, MySQLi also offers a procedural way of using it, just like its predecessor, MySQL extension. Now, the other thing you should understand is that both of them support prepared statements. Now, prepared statements are very important, especially for ensuring that you do not get attacked by hackers, especially through MySQL injections. So what prepared statements do is that they send a query without the data first. So they just put a question mark, select last name from employee where ID is equals to just question mark. So that's the first step. You send the query to the DBMS, then the DBMS now awaits for the variable, and therefore you have to send a specific variable, which really cannot be another MySQL statement, and therefore that ensures that attacks such as MySQL injection cannot succeed. So that's why prepared statements are very important in improving the security of your web application. Now, in order to access the MySQL database, you must connect to the server, and this is how we do it. This is the statement to connect to a server. This one here. So what you do first is you create a variable that will hold the connection. Here we've just created a variable called con. Then we're saying is equals to new. So we create a new MySQLi object for the connection, and we pass it several parameters, 1, 2, 3. Now these parameters have been defined here. They're simply variables. So the first parameter is localhost. Localhost simply means that this database is hosted within this particular application, within this particular computer, for example. Then the username is the admin username for that particular database. Normally you create a user that has rights to access that database. So here we're just passing the username for that user. Then we also pass their password. So those are the three compulsory parameters that you must pass when creating a connection to the database using MySQLi in PHP. Now, the other thing we're doing here is simply to check whether the connection succeeded or whether it failed. So how to do that? Now, we use the connection variable that we just created. Then we use the arrow operator to reference to the connection error function. So we're simply pointing to that. Now this function connect_error will either return true or false. If this statement worked correctly, then it will return false. If it didn't work, for example, you gave it a wrong password, then it will return true. So if it returns true, then this is executed. So it's going to be executed. It's going to die simply means that no other line is going to be executed after this, but it's going to print out connection failed, and it's going to print out the exact error that happened. For example, the database password that you provided is not recognizable or something. That is just an example. You can try during the practical just to pass a wrong password, and you will see the specific error message that it gives you. Otherwise, if this is false, then it's simply gonna print out that the connection occurred successfully. So generally, that is how that is how we do it. Okay. When you're done using your MySQL connection, it is advisable that you close it, and this is how you close it. The connection variable, then again the arrow operator, then you call the close function like that. So that is how we close. When you do that, then the connection is closed, and anyone else who needs to do operations with the database, they have to connect again. Now, generally, to create a database in MySQL, you have to have what we call the create privileges. So when we do create a user, we give them privileges. Privileges simply means the commands they can be able to execute. So one of those commands is the create. So you must have that privilege to create or to delete a MySQL database. Now, again, this is just an image to show you the fact that a database will consist of one or more tables. For example, this one looks like a what? What's your guess really? It looks like a database for what? You can see it has orders table, it has payments table, orders details, products, product lines, employees, offices. So this can be a database or what? I think you guessed right, maybe an e-commerce system. Yeah, so that is just an example of a database there. Okay, so let's jump into creating a database. We do that using a command called create database, and the syntax is create database, then the name of the database. Remember, in MySQL, every statement has to end with a semicolon. Now, in the next slide, we're going to create a database with the name MyDB. Okay, so here, remember, if you're doing it in PHP, your connection has to work first. So if your connection is working, then you can go ahead and create the database. So we are doing it by using the create database command, then giving it the name MyDB, and we are simply storing that in a variable, that SQL statement in a variable called SQL. Now we execute that particular query by using the query function. So how to do so is you do a $con for the connection, then the arrow operator, then you call the query function and you pass it the SQL statement. So here we're simply saying if that query function has returned true, then we want to print out on the screen database created successfully. Otherwise, we want to print error creating database. Then we also print the exact error like that using the connection, arrow operator, and we call the error function. And of course, the last thing we normally do is to close the connection once we are done with it. Okay. Now, please note that when creating the connection, database connection, you must provide the server name, for example, localhost, the username, and also the password. So we also have a tip here. If you have to use a specific port to access the server, then you need to add an empty string and a database name argument. Oh no, an empty string for the database name argument. Okay, so it's here, but let me just retype it so that maybe it's on one line. So something like this, MySQLi, MySQLi, like that. Then you give it local host, then comma, then the username, comma, then the password, comma, then you give it an empty string like that for the database name argument. Then you specify the port, the specific port that you want to use. For example, 80, for example, something like that. Then semicolon. So that's what you do if you want to specify a specific port that you want to use for the connection. Of course, 88 is the default. Okay, now to create a table, we use the create table statement. We want to create a table called my guests with the columns ID, first name, last name, email, and registration date. Let's look at that command here. So the command is create table, then the name of the table, then an opening bracket and a closing bracket. Now, the other thing we do is to specify the name of the column, the data type, and the length that it should accept. For example, integer, and it should be a maximum of 6 digits. Then for integers, we can say whether it's unsigned or signed. So unsigned simply means it can take in positive and negative numbers without a sign. And then signed means you have to provide the sign. Did I say it correctly? Really, I don't think so. I'm not sure, but I think for unsigned can only take positive numbers. Then signed can take both positive and negative. Then you have this auto increment. Auto increment will increment the ID value every time a new person is added to this table automatically. So if the first person is added, the number will be 1. If the second person is added, 2, etc., etc. Then primary key simply means that this column ID is going to be the unique. It's going to be the primary key, means it's going to be unique. Because if it's auto increment, then no 2 values on that column are ever going to be the same. So we want to use it as a primary key. Then the second column, please remember there's a comma here. Don't want to overlook that. Then the second one is first name, then varchar. We want it to have a maximum of 30 digits. Then we want it to be not null. Now, not null means whenever you create a guest, because I think this is a table for guests, you cannot fail to provide first name. It's like required in HTML. So you have to, it cannot be empty. That's it. It cannot be empty. It cannot be null. Then we have last name. So very similar to first name. Then we have email, a little bit longer. Some emails can be long, so 50 characters. Again, varchar simply means it's a character. Then there's an interesting one here. Sorry, I meant to use rectangles for the column names just to differentiate it from the format. Okay, then we have registration date here. Now, registration date, when we add a guest, we want to automatically add the time. So for the data type, we select timestamp, then default current timestamp. So on update current timestamp. It simply means that when you add a person, you're not going to add the registration date. It's simply going to take and store the time when that particular record was created. So that is what this particular statement does. That is what update current timestamp does. And the data type for that particular column has to be timestamp. Okay, so let's move on. I've already explained this, but I think we have this here. unsigned used for number types limits the stored data to positive numbers. Yes, so only positive numbers and 0. So if it's unsigned, you can't have negative numbers. Otherwise, if you want negative numbers, then you put signed. Okay. Then also default. I didn't explain this very well. Default value, set a default value that is added when no other value is passed. Very important. Default sets a default value that is added when no other value is passed. So what that means is, for example, the registration date here, the data type is timestamp, but you can pass it the timestamp from PHP. You can pass it the timestamp from PHP. But if you don't pass it, then the default value is going to be the current timestamp. If you don't pass it any value when you are adding a guest, then it's simply going to update automatically the current timestamp. So that is what default does. Okay. Then we have auto increment, which I've already explained, and primary key. So let's put this table here to show you an example of auto increment. So this is auto increment. So when the first student is created on this table, they have the ID 101. The following student will be 102, etc., etc. Right? Okay. So we remember you still have to do the connection. So this bit is for the connection. Then this is the SQL statement we just evaluated for creating a table. Then after that, you can use an if statement to check whether the table was created correctly. And remember, you have to call the query function and pass it the SQL statement. So if it's true, we want to just say the table has been created successfully. Otherwise, we want to say it has not been created successfully and print the exact error. So several errors can occur. For example, you forgot to do a comma, or you mistyped one of these data types, or you didn't, for example, provide the length, etc., etc. So if you do any of that, then this function is very handy. This one, very important. So always use it in order to get a specific error. And of course, we also close the connection when we're done. Now, how do we insert a data? How do we insert data into the table we just created? To insert data, the SQL query must be quoted, meaning you must put it in quotes. String values should also be quoted, must be quoted. Then numeric values, that is integers, must not be quoted. Not null or null values must not be quoted. When you input null, you should not quote it. So this is the syntax. This is the syntax for creating a new record in a MySQL table. So insert, hey, what's wrong with my, what is wrong with my keyboard? Insert into, then the table name. Then we have this portion here. Then we have some keyword here, values. Then we have this. So this portion here specifies the column names, column names separated by comma, column 1, comma, column 2, comma, etc., etc. Then these are the values, value 1, value 2, value 3, etc. Now, what the previous slide was saying is that for these values, if it's a string, you must put it inside quotes. For example, if value 1 is a string, then you have to do, you have to do value 1 like that. If value 2 is an integer, for example 40, then does not need. If value 3 is null, then you just type null like that. You don't need to put it in quotes. Okay. In the previous chapter, we created an empty table named my guest. with 5 fields: ID, first name, last name, email, registration date. Now let's fill the table. So in the following example, we're gonna see how to do that. But note, if a column is auto increment like the ID or timestamp with default update as current timestamp like the registration date field, then there is no need to specify it in the SQL insert query. So you don't need to do that. MySQL instead will automatically add the value. Now here, I just put this graphic image to show you how a timestamp might be saved. This is just one way how it might be saved, just the number of seconds since 1st January, the very first second of 1st January 1970. So the number of seconds. So that's a timestamp. Most of the time we want, for example, to just know when the person joined or when a particular record was created. So normally for that, we put the data type as timestamp with default update of current timestamp. Okay, so this is the code for inserting. Of course, that is the connection, and this is the SQL statement for inserting. We want to insert, so the keyword is insert, into, and values. Those are the keywords. So this is the name of the table, my guests. Then these are the column names. We want to insert first name, last name, and email. And the values we want to insert, all of them are varchar, and therefore we put them in quotes. It can be double quotes or single quotes, but remember, this is very important. If the SQL statement has been put inside double quotes, then you cannot use double quotes here, because the program will confuse this first double quote as trying to end or close this double quote. So if we've used outside double quotes, then inside we use single quotes. So that is very important. Okay, and of course, just like before, we want to check whether the insertion occurred correctly and just print it. If it didn't, we also want to know which error occurred. So for example, if you forgot to put "do" inside those single quotes, it's just going to tell you that you've not done that. So that is very important again for troubleshooting your code. Okay. Sometimes you also want to update, you want to get the ID of the last inserted record. This is very important at times, because maybe you also want to use that ID on another table. So you've just inserted, for example, in the user table where you've put their name and blah, 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 but you also want to update another table. For example, the join date table or something, and you just want to save their ID and when they joined and the location where they joined from, for example, the country, etc., etc. So that's why you might want to, yes, create that particular record, but also get the ID so that you can do some other things on it. And to do that, MySQL has a solution for that. So let's just try and see here. So again, this bit is the connection. Then this is the insert. And here we are checking whether the insertion occurred correctly. Now, if it occurred correctly, we want to get the last ID. So we're creating a variable for that. And the code to do that, the function is called insert_ID. So the arrow operator, and then insert_ID. So if we do that, then we can always print that last ID. So that's how we get the last ID. In case you ever get into such a need, please remember that function, insert_ID. Now, Sometimes you might want to create multiple records at a go. You want to create multiple records at a go rather than one at a time. To do that, MySQLi provides what we call the MySQLi underscore multi underscore query function. So let's see how we can add multiple records, specifically 3 in the MyGuest table. Okay, so you just write the 3 statements. Remember, each statement ends with a semicolon. Now, here, the first one here, we create a variable called MySQL, and we use the assignment operator. Then the second, we still use the same variable, but we use the concatenation assignment operator. Concatenation assignment operator simply means a dot and is equals to. It simply means it's simply going to add this statement after this semicolon. Simply going to combine them. That's the word I was looking for, combine. So it's called the assignment concatenation operator. So that's what you're doing. So here we've combined these 3 insert statements together, and the function multi underscore query is now used to execute these 3 statements at a go. So that's how we do it, and we just want to print that it has happened successfully. So the function is called multi underscore query. Please remember it. Okay. So take time and at least remember that, because it's very important. Okay, now how do we select data from a MySQL database? We do so using the select statement. It's called the select statement. Here you provide the list of columns, comma separated, that you want to retrieve data from. Then we have the keyword from, then the table where you want to retrieve data from. So that's how we do it. Now, if you want to retrieve data from all the columns in the table, then you use an asterisk, like in this example here. So select all columns from some table. Now, it's not advisable to use this, because it's advisable to only select the data that you need at a particular time, instead of selecting everything and not using some. When you select all, it adds on the load of your database management system, and that can slow things down. So it's advised that you just specify the specific columns that you need at a particular point. Okay, so we just want to select some columns here from the table MyGuest, from the table MyGuest. So the command is select, then ID, comma, first name, comma, last name, then from, then the name of the table. Then after that, remember, we do this in 3 levels. So the first level is this one, where we specify the SQL statement. Then we execute the query. We also save the query in some variable, for example, results. And we execute the query just like we've done with all the others. So the connection, then arrow, then query, like that. Then we pass it. Now, after we've done that, we need to check. Now, this is the third step. We need to check whether any rows were returned. And to do that, we have a function called num underscore rows. So we simply use the result variable that we created here. Then we use the arrow operator and then num underscore rows. Now, if whatever rows have been returned, this will return the number of rows that have been returned. If it's greater than 0, then we know, then we have something. So after that, now we go on to fetch the rows. Now, normally we fetch the rows using the fetch underscore assoc function. Now, this fetch underscore assoc function will return an array for each row, So, hey, this is a bit complicated, but it takes time to be understood. So here we are using a while loop. So we create a variable that is going to hold each array that is going to be returned by the fetch assoc. So it is the results, then arrow operator, and then fetch underscore assoc. So this will return an array. So when it returns an array, it's going to be saved on the row variable. This variable we've created, the array is going to be saved here. Now that array is what we call an associative array. An associative array, the index is defined by name. Index defined by a name. So in fact, that is why this function is called fetch assoc. So it is assoc because of associative. It returns an associative array. So in short, it is fetch assoc, like that. So that is the name of the function. Now, the index in this particular case, the index is going to be the name of the column. The name of the column. So I'm trying to zoom out some more. Good. Okay, so that is why here we are printing row, which is the array. Remember now, the array is going to be saved on this variable row. Then we are entering the name of the column for that table, this name ID. Then we also print row first name. So again, first name, this one. Then row, then last name. So it's the name of the column because it returns, fetch assoc returns an associative array. Then we print a break so that this can go to the next, the next record can begin from a new line. Okay, otherwise, if num rows is less than 0, then simply going to say 0 results. So that's what we have there. So again, I think these are 4 steps which I should highlight. So this is step number 1. Then from step number 1, we have here step number 2. Then we have here step number 3 to check whether anything was found. And lastly, we now take whatever has been found. Step number 4. So this needs a bit of time to understand. You might not get it completely the first time. Don't give up. Just keep on trying to get it with time. After you've used it for a while, and you can be able to understand it. And of course, after fetching the array, you have to print it. So that should be like step number 5. So I'll give you a minute to go over that. And feel free in case you have a question. Okay, so let's move on. So this statement is gonna give this output we're seeing here. So the while statement is gonna end after all the records have been returned. And most of the time, sometimes we use fetch, we use for each loop, for each rather than while to do that. Okay. So I have already explained that, so I'm not going to go over it again. But here now we learn how to delete data from the record using the delete statement. It has some very important keywords like delete from and where, the where clause. This is the first time we're meeting the where clause, and the where clause is very important. Now, simple to delete data from the record. Delete from, then the table name, then you have to specify some column and the value equated to it. For example, ID is equals to 1. It has to be some unique value. Otherwise, if you don't use some unique value, for example, you say first name is equals to Kelvin, then all the Kelvins are going to be deleted. It's a dangerous fit. Now, please remember the where clause in the delete syntax specifies which record or records that should be deleted. If you omit the where clause, you don't do the where clause, then all records are going to be deleted. That's why I've decided to use this image here. Very dangerous. So for example, if you just write delete from my guest, then all the records, you just hit enter and that SQL statement is executed. All the records on that table are gonna be deleted. It's really dangerous. Always make sure you use where, and for the where, make sure you specify a column that has unique values and you pass that particular unique value that you want to give. Another thing I want to mention here is that you might have noticed so far that in MySQL, each keyword is written in all caps. So that is a convention. If you write it in small, it will still work, but your code won't be very readable. So it's a convention that for MySQL keywords, you write them, the keywords, in uppercase, while the other names, you just write them the way they're supposed to be written, whether it's uppercase, lower, or mixed case. Okay. So this is how the my guest table looks like. So this is how it looks like with 3 records: John, Mary, and Julie. Now, Julie has the ID of 3. We want to delete Julie. So to do that, we will write this statement: delete from my guests where ID is equals to 3. And we have to call the query function and pass it the statement. If it returns true, then we can print out that. Otherwise, we can print out the error. After we've deleted Julie, then we're only remaining with John and Mary. Okay. The other important thing that you need to do is update. Now, What is the name? There's the name I'm trying to remember. I forget it. Crude. We normally talk of crude operations. When you're dealing with databases, you must understand the crude operation. So crude means, crude is an acronym standing for create, read, update, delete. That is what we call crude. So far we've done create, we've done reading using the select statement, we've done delete using the delete statement, and now finally we are looking at update. Update is almost similar to delete, because you must also use the where clause. Where update where. But other than update and where, it also has a keyword set. Of course, you want to, when you're updating, you want to change some value, so you have to use set, then update some table, then set some column to some new value, comma, some other column to some new value, where ID, for example, is equals to 2. So for example, we want to change a first name from Mary to some value, maybe Alice. We also want to change their second name from Mo to Mia. So that's how we do this. So let's have a look at an example. But before we go there, again, where very important. If you omit the where clause, all records will be updated. So that's why I'm using this to remind you that whenever you want to do an update or a delete, stop, think carefully, and then act. Very important, engineer. Okay, so this is how the my guests table looks like right now with John Doe and Mary Moore. We want to update the record of the person whose ID is equals to 2. This person should be Mary Moore. And we want to update Mary Moore's what? Last name to Doe. So again, update my guest set, then the value, then where, very important, where ID is equals to 2. Then we pass over the value like that. Okay, so after the record is updated successfully, then the name changes from Mo to Doe, Mary Doe, like that. So in case we wanted to change also, for example, the email, then we simply do a comma. So it will look something like the statement will be, let me just create a variable SQL, then it should be update the table name, my guests, then set the first thing we want to set is the last name is equals to, so we're going to use just one, comma, then email that is equals to, email is equals to, for example, mdo@example.com. that. Then lastly, we have to do where, the where clause, where id is equals to 2. Then we do the closing quote and the semicolon. Just separate them using a comma. Okay. Now, when you're selecting data from the database, you don't want to overwhelm the database by asking for 1,000 records at a go. That is where the limit MySQL limit clause comes in handy. Now, when you request a large number of records, that will impact on the performance. Because if the query is supposed to return 1,000 records, it's going to take some seconds to do that, and that will really impact on the performance. Now, it is better to return data in small sets, for example, 50s, so you can, or even 30s. So you can just select 1 to 30, and now you can have lists where the user can click next in order for the next 30 again to be loaded. I think you've seen that in some of the web applications that you've used. So the limit clause makes it easy to code multi-page results or pagination in the SQL. So we use it to do that, and is very useful, especially on large tables. So let's just see. We want to select 1 to 30 records, inclusive of 30. So from number 1 to 30, from a table called orders. So how will that query look like? That query will look like this. Select all columns from the table orders, but we want to limit to 30. So that's going to return 1 to 30, like that. Okay, sometimes we want to select records, for example, from number 16 to number 25, inclusive of number 25. So for that, MySQL provides the offset, parameter. So in this example, we want to return 10 records starting from record number 16. So to do that, we do select from orders. So limit, so we just want 10 records. We want 10 records. So limit 10, but start from, that is what offset really means. Start from, not start from. Normally it begins from the next number. So if you say offset 15, then it means that skip 15. So begin from 16, then 10. So offset means skip the first 15. So it's going to begin from number 16. So this command is going to return records from 16 all the way to 25. Because from 16, then move 10 steps. So that is what offset does. You can also use a shorter syntax. Instead of using the offset, there's another way. You can use limit, then you start with the offset value. So 15, then comma, then the number of values you want to return, the number of records you want to return. So this is just the offset Then this is the number of records you want to return. Please remember that you must use a comma. Notice that the numbers are reversed when you use a comma. Yeah, you start with the offset value, then the number of records you want to return. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of this very interesting topic on PHP and MySQL. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know in case you have any questions on the comment below, and I'll for sure make time to respond. Asanteni sana, and enjoy the rest of your day and indeed your weekend. We continue to thank the Lord for the rains. It was getting scary, and I actually prayed about it. And I'm glad that on the 1st of November, we got rains. I had prayed on 31st of October. Therefore, I was very excited. It's a bit cold, that's why I'm having my jacket, but I'm not complaining. I'm so happy that we have the rains. At least now we're gonna get food, and also our wild animals are not gonna die as they've been doing. And I'm just excited because just outside here, I've just seen a jacaranda tree shedding some purple flowers, and therefore the environment really looks nice, just with a few drops of rains that we've received for the past 2 days. We thank God, and we continue to pray that our weather might change for the better, and that we may also be responsible citizens to take care of our environment so that we don't accelerate climate change to the worse. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a nice time. Bye-bye.